A couple weeks ago, Digital Foundry posted a video where they pitted the RTX 3070 mobile GPU against the PlayStation 5, and guys, I was shocked at just how good the performance actually was. But I'm going to do you guys one better. Today, we're going to be pitting the PlayStation 5 against an all AMD setup in order to do a pure apples to apples comparison against the PlayStation 5 and the MSI Delta 15. Hey guys, Turk here, hope you're having a great day. Just over a year ago, we made a mock-up build of the PlayStation 5 using modern PC components such as the 3700X and the RX 5600 XT GPU. Now, we've been making performance predictions thanks to AMD's performance per watt claims, and we've made iterative improvements as we've been going along. And I have been dying to get my hands on a 36 compute unit desktop graphics card in order to put this project and comparison to rest. Unfortunately, the wise guys over at AMD decided to nix the RX 6700 graphics card, so this project has been kind of SOL. Now, I could use the RX 6600 XT instead, but I can already see you guys in the comments saying, Turk, you can't compare 32 compute units at different wattages and frequency. And guys, I completely get it, and you're absolutely right. Lucky for us though, AMD does provide us with a diamond in the rough in their mobile lineup, and that's the RX 6700M. Under the AMD Advantage umbrella, we get access to their latest Zen 3 CPUs as well as their latest RDNA 2 based GPUs into the same system platform, which will leverage some of the special software that AMD's been doing and optimizing, such as Smart Shift. More on that in just a bit. Now, to be quite clear, guys, this is not a laptop review for the MSI Delta 15. Now, if you guys want to see that, make sure y'all hit the subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. That way, I know you guys want to see how this laptop performs in a more standard application perspective. Now, I have had my issues with this particular unit, and I've even come up with some software bugs that have forced MSI to make some software changes with both their UEFI as well as their firmware BIOS. But back to the PlayStation 5. Let's see how these two different units compare on paper. As for the CPUs are concerned, AMD's cores have gotten increasingly better over the past few years, and the Zen 2 architecture is when they've finally caught their stride. However, the newer Zen 3 architecture contains known improvements with the IPC and architectural changes that can improve the performance for their cores, so that's probably the most relevant delta on this sheet. Both processors are going to have access to 8 cores and 16 threads on their CPUs, but the laptop variant boosts to an impressive 4.4 GHz. Now, this might be a shockingly over-spec'd processor for the laptop, but as you'll see as we go throughout this video, we don't usually boost that high, and to be honest, there's a lot more power that needs to go to other components on the system. The GPU is a much more straightforward comparison. Each GPU will have 36 compute units, ray tracing units, and 64 ROPs. As for clock speeds, the PlayStation 5 is clocked slightly lower than the 6700M, and due to the limited TDP of the laptop GPU, 2300 MHz will be a stretch in many of the most demanding games. The memory configuration contains the most variance across the setups today, with the PlayStation 5 favoring the wider, slower configuration. At the same time, the laptop's is thinner and faster. However, in the end, the PlayStation 5 does manage to have higher memory bandwidth on the platforms, but either way you spin it, guys, both of these systems have plenty of GDDR6 capacity and should be able to play at 4K resolutions as well as pretty decent detail settings. The last critical component for discussion today is each platform's power constraints. I'll be using the extreme performance setting with the Delta 15, unlocking what equates to be about 130 watts of power available to the CPU and GPU. In general, the GPU is configured to run right at 110 watts TGP, which is 25 watts short of the listed maximum from AMD's website. The CPU is also configurable, and in this mode, the CPU is set to run at 54 watts. But to put it all into context, when I plug in this laptop into my kilowatt, which is measuring power drawn from the wall, I am getting about 180 watts when running a typical gaming workload. As for the PlayStation 5, when we take a look at the Tech PowerUp website, it is listed as running right at 180 watts as well, and there are several of different reports on the internet where they've measured the wattage to be anywhere between 140 and 200 watts. So to be quite honest, guys, I think both of our platforms today are looking very similar to one another. Overall, the MSI Delta 15 looks to be pretty spot on when comparing the spec sheet against the PlayStation 5, but how does that pan out when it comes to gaming performance? In today's video, I'm going to be leaning very heavily on Digital Foundry's analysis of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. They've been able to identify both the resolutions and the detail settings to many of the console games and have translated them into PC settings. They've got well over 12 different videos covering various launches, updates, and PlayStation 5 upgrade releases. I'm going to be looking at the frame rates as well as taking a deeper dive into the CPU, GPU, frequencies, and power consumption numbers in order to see just how this laptop compares hardware-wise to the PlayStation 5. I have a great relationship with Doom Eternal, and I have covered it since its announcement at QuakeCon, and I've tested it on a wide variety of hardware. Lucky for us, with the latest PlayStation 5 updates, we have 3 different test modes up our sleeves. Now, as a sanity check, let's start off with Quality Mode. Quality Mode provides ultra detail settings while aiming for 60 FPS gameplay, running between a native 4K and 1800p thanks to id Tech 7's excellent dynamic resolution scaling. Dialing in those same options and enabling DRS for 60 FPS, the 6700M runs at an impressive 82 FPS on average, with frame rates dipping to 56 FPS 1% of the time. Now, on the surface, this checks out, so let's see what the other modes do. Performance mode is ideal for ripping and tearing and aiming for a 120 FPS experience while maintaining medium detail settings and a DRS setting between 1584p and 1080p. For the PC, 1584p, it's just not really standard, so I'm going to be kicking in 1800p with 120 FPS as our DRS target, and we managed to land right at 122 FPS on average while hitting 1% lows of 86 FPS. Now, I did see a few instances of DRS hitting at about 60% of our resolution, and that translates to right at 1080p. What I find amazing here, guys, is that is exactly what Digital Foundry saw in their analysis. Though less than ideal, we do hit our performance targets, so let's take a look at the system's lower level performance. Our frequencies look right on target, with average CPU frequency landing at 3175 MHz and GPU clocks in at 1965 MHz. Clearly, we still have instances where the CPU is clocking faster than what the PlayStation 5 is rated for. Still, given the platform and the system's limitations, I'd say this is incredibly close. Digging a bit deeper, we get to see the true power of the 6700M and the PlayStation 5's 36 compute units. With an average GPU utilization of 98%, the GPU component is pushing right at 110 watts, which lines up perfectly with what our initial targets come from over a year ago. And at a 41.2% utilization, the CPU is only sipping on 16.3 watts of power, reported by Hardware Info's CPU PPT. As for CPU plus GPU power, we're running right at 130 watts. Impressive, am I right? So how about with the ray tracing? Digital Foundry claims the resolution target is 1800p with dips down to 1260p with DRS engaged for 60 FPS experience. Again, medium detail settings are used, but this time with full RT enabled. From the PC side, I can dial in these same settings and check the box for RT, and we're off. On average, in the first stage of the game, I can hit 76 FPS with 1% lows snagging just at 47 FPS. This means that we are running above our DRS target most of the time while engaging DRS in the most stressful of instances. We see an interesting shift for average power where the GPU pulls an additional 5 watts while the CPU sees a 5 watt reduction. As a result, the CPU operating frequencies reduce to about 2800 MHz, and the GPU, it boosts to 2085 MHz. This is the benefit of AMD SmartShift technology. Given the system's 130 watt CPU plus GPU power budget, depending on the load, the system dictates where to allocate the wattage up to the component's rated limit. To sum up Doom Eternal, the 6700M on the MSI Delta 15 comes shockingly close to the PlayStation 5's performance, and we actually get to see a glimpse at just what the different components of the laptop are able to do. So let's see what this looks like in some more games. Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition is designed only for systems with RT support. Fortunately for the PlayStation 5 and the Delta 15, we've got it covered. As identified in the Digital Foundry video, it is difficult to pinpoint the quality settings for the PC as compared to the console. So for simplicity, I'm going to be sticking to the high quality settings for my benchmark runs. Another downside of the PC is we just don't have access to dynamic resolution scaling. The PlayStation 5 runs at a resolution target of 1512p with the lower limit set to 1080p. So for my testing, I'll be shooting for the middle at 1440p. The 6700M struggles to hit the 60 FPS frame rate target with the high preset, indicating that we would have often engaged DRS if this feature were available. I went ahead and tested both 1080p and 720p to sort of simulate the frame rates we'd see when DRS engages. We do, in fact, run above 1080p in most of our loop, further validating our setup is similar to Digital Foundry's findings. Looking under the hood a bit, our CPU consumes 17.1 watts of power on average while running at an impressive 3500 MHz. Knowing the limitations of our setup, I would expect that the console's optimizations and lower level controls of the background processes would allow Metro to perform better on the PlayStation 5. As for the GPU, it is still maxed out at around 110 watts and it clocks up to 2120 MHz on average. Overall, Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, it plays kind of okay on the MSI Delta 15, but it shows just how important dynamic resolution scaling is when it comes to the PlayStation 5's success. If only these developers would allow this feature in this game, I would imagine the Delta 15 would be right on track. Next up, Call of Duty Warzone. Using Digital Foundry's quality settings and the built-in resolution sliders, I can dial in the PlayStation 5's upper resolution of 1535p and engaging DRS set to 120 FPS. When operating in the spectator mode, we managed to land at 114 FPS on average, with 1% lows landing at 75 FPS. As for frequencies, the CPU is getting hammered with an average clock speed of 3475 and a GPU frequency of 2000 MHz. This means that the upscaling tech that we have available on the PC is just not that great for Warzone, and that the 6700M here on our Delta 15, it just doesn't have the hardware chops to hit that aggressive 120 FPS experience. And as we saw with Metro Exodus, the console's optimizations as well as the tweaks that are available for Warzone, they're far superior on the PlayStation 5. However, the 6700M here, it does manage to hit, 115 FPS, which is pretty darn close to the performance we see on the PlayStation 5. One of the big launch titles for the PlayStation 5 that caused a lot of controversy by the community is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. With the latest updates, the PlayStation 5's performance mode shoots for a target resolution of 720p at 60 FPS with a minimum resolution of 1440p. Quality mode aims for a native 4K display while only running at 30 FPS. For our comparison today, let's knock out quality mode first. Using Digital Foundry's analysis for detail settings and enabling their adaptive aliasing feature, the Delta 15's 6700M manages to hit 32 FPS on average, with dips to 23 FPS at times, so a pretty straightforward result. However, let's open up the can of worms of performance mode. On the PC, we have the ability to change our render resolution, which gives us a resolution scale of about 80% and 60%, or settings of 1728p, 1512p, and 1296p. Running the benchmark at each of these settings with adaptive scaling enabled, we get a decent stepping up of performance of 53, 59, and 63 FPS respectively. Now this is where we see the PC's upscaling options are quite literal garbage. When running in adaptive aliasing mode, you're going to be able to select, which of your target frame rates you want to run, and the engine itself selects if you're running at native resolution, 0.92 scaling factor, or 0.85 scaling factor. So if you do the math on that, you might not ever really hit your target frame rate. You might be running, anywhere at that 0.85 scaling factor. So clearly, when compared to the PlayStation 5's technology solution, it is far superior because we get a fluid gaming experience, but here, it's just not all that great. Looking at the operating frequencies, we finally managed to surpass the PlayStation 5's GPU advertised clock speed, and the 6700M runs at 2352 MHz, while the CPU manages to hit 3300 MHz on average. Clearly, the PC release is not optimized well enough to leverage the hardware adequately. Still, we managed to kind of brute force our way to a similar performance to the PlayStation 5. But can it run Crysis? I mean, Cyberpunk. Since the true PS5 update has been delayed, we're going to have to stick to our 60 FPS target running at a resolution of 1154p. Again, consoles can use some pretty weird resolutions that our PC just can't set up, so I'm going to have to compromise. I start off with a base resolution of 1800p and use the console early next-gen quality level in order to initiate the proper quality settings. Then I have to remove that from my command line options and then engage Dynamic Fidelity FX Cast to target the 60 FPS. Though it's not the best implementation, we do manage to hit on average 62 FPS and 1% lows of 48. At the end of the day, I'm running anywhere between 1260p and 900p. The frequencies of the Delta 15 are more in line with what we expect from the PlayStation 5. The CPU is around 3350 MHz and the 6700M is at 2130 MHz. Power consumption is still right on track, though the CPU is starting to inch towards 19 watts and the GPU, it's a bit below 109. Two more games, and this time we get to see some pretty clear differentiation between how the games are actually rendered between the PlayStation 5 and the PC. With Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the PlayStation 5 uses a technology known as checkerboarding, where the game will actually render certain blocks of pixels across the frame and then do another step and then kind of interpolate what the frame's actually supposed to look like. By doing so, they're able to lower the GPU load on the graphics solution, and that will subsequently boost our performance going forward. As for the PC, I guess we're just kind of stuck in the dark ages here. Fear not, with a bit of math and counting the number of pixels actually rendered, we can approximate the render resolution of the Delta 15. So we're shooting anywhere between 1440p and 1800p. So for this test, I'm using medium detail settings at 1800p, so there could be some wiggle room when it comes to either the resolution or the detail settings. Tomb Raider runs at a comfortable 74 FPS on average with an impressive 58 FPS for the 1% low. That would be a pretty good gaming experience for most gamers. If we balance the resolution and the detail settings, I have no doubt we could effectively match the PlayStation 5. The CPU and GPU are also running within the spec for the console. The GPU chugs on 114 watts of power at 2070 MHz, while the CPU sips on 14 watts at a leisurely 3125 MHz. The last game today is Marvel's Avengers. It also uses checkerboard rendering on the console, but the PC version does have some additional features. In the PlayStation 5's performance mode, the resolution gets dropped to 1800p with DRS, so we can match these settings pretty close, minus the checkerboarding of course. At 1800p in high detail settings, we hit 60 FPS on average and dip to 50 FPS at 1% lows. However, we see a strong shift of power utilization going to the CPU in this game, with average operating frequencies of 3475 MHz and the GPU dialing back to 2030 MHz. Digital Foundry has many more videos where they've done similar analysis comparing the console's detail settings versus the PC's detail settings, and these are just the 7 games that I have access to. But we could repeat this experiment over and over again, but I think it's quite clear that the MSI Delta 15 and more importantly, the 6700M, they're able to match the resolution targets as well as the frame rate targets at similar detail settings that what the console is able to produce. Now the MSI Delta 15, it runs at a 130 watt, total power budget for the CPU and GPU. So I imagine if there was a 150 watt or a 160 watt laptop out there, those laptops would be an even better comparison to what the console is able to produce, and I honestly think that would be the better analog for this comparison. So let's address a couple of the caveats that I know you guys are writing down in the comments. Obviously, this Delta 15 laptop is running the Zen 3 CPU, which is architecturally different than the Zen 2. But if we compare the operating frequency as well as the average CPU power we're running through the games, I think that the IPC and performance per watt improvements we get going from Zen 2 to Zen 3, I think they're kind of negligible. We might gain like 1 to 2 FPS, but I don't really think it's going to impact our performance here all that much. Next is the limitations of the laptop. I would have loved to just go into Ryzen Master and set up a custom TDP, set a maximum frequency for my CPUs, and call it a day, but unfortunately, with a laptop, we're usually locked down in both our CPU and GPU front. As for the GPU, to be quite honest, I don't know if this laptop could really handle any more wattage. As I was running, even with a laptop cooling pad, the cooling solution was running the GPU at a shockingly 98 degrees Celsius, which is below the spec for the 6700M, but it was really loud, very hot, and I don't know if we could pump any more wattage into the system to get any more additional performance. Clearly, the PlayStation 5's cooling solution, as well as its form factor, it's able to cool and produce pretty good performance right out of the gate, but I still find it pretty shocking that a mobile gaming laptop is able to get similar performance. But to sum it up, guys, the performance we've been trying to achieve today just shows just how well equipped the PlayStation 5 is when it comes to its hardware as well as its software. When it comes to the features and the different optimizations that these developers are able to produce, I find that the PlayStation 5 has got a lot of legs left on it, and I think it will be around for quite a long time. Heck, looking at dynamic resolution scaling, just seeing how well that technology performs shows just how long these next-gen consoles are going to be able to land. But what's sad to say here, guys, is as a PC gamer, without dynamic resolution scaling, we have to optimize our setups and buy new graphics cards. And that's just something that console gamers just don't have to deal with until the PlayStation 6 or the PlayStation 5 Pro, whatever comes first. So what does it take to build a next-generation gaming PC in order to match the next-generation consoles? Well, now that we understand how the PlayStation 5 performs, and we can compare that performance and put actual numbers to it, thanks to the MSI Delta 15 having very similar CPU architecture, having pretty much spot on the same GPU configuration, we can finally bridge the gap between the 6700M's performance and any other types of hardware that you have your eyes on. So if you are looking for an RTX 3060, 6600 XT, we can compare the performance at 1080p, 1440p of that against the 6700M, and we can finally say definitively that your PC part picker list is better or worse than a current generation hardware. But what's more important here, guys, is that y'all stuck to the end of the video, and I can't thank y'all enough. I've been working on this content for over a year, and the MSI Delta 15 and the 6700M, it just helps validate the kind of content I've been putting out here on the channel, and I'm just surprised at just how accurate I was in all of my performance predictions. And dude, I'm just so proud of just what I've done and put out here for you guys to watch. So if y'all have enjoyed this, make sure you've hit the subscribe button, share this with your friends. We're almost at 3,000 subscribers here on YouTube. There's no doubt we can make it to 10,000, but I can't do it without your help. So guys, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And so for all you members of the Turk Force, thanks for watching. Turk out.